The humidity of Savannah, Georgia, usually felt like a warm hug, but today it felt like a burial shroud. Bertha Brown stood at the back of St. Jude's Episcopal Church, her hands smoothing the silk of her champagne-colored dress. It was a beautiful dress, classy, understated, expensive. It was the dress she was supposed to wear as the bride 6 months ago. Today, she was wearing it as a courtesy guest. Her ex-fiancé, Edward, stood at the altar, beaming at a woman who looked like a literal porcelain doll. The girl was 24, a yoga instructor with a legacy last name and skin that hadn't yet learned the language of a single wrinkle. "She looks like a flower," a voice hissed from the pew in front of Bertha. It was Edward's mother, Mrs. Sterling. She didn't turn around. She knew exactly who was sitting behind her. "Not like that relic Edward almost saddled us with." The sister-in-law chuckled, the sound sharp as a razor. Can you imagine the photos? Bertha would have looked like his babysitter, or his housekeeper. Edward finally woke up. A man in his position needs a trophy, not a history project. She's just washed up. He needs a future, not a fossil. Bertha's breath hitched. The relic sat perfectly still. At 50, Bertha was radiant. Her skin was a deep, polished ebony. Her eyes held the wisdom of a woman who had built a real estate empire from nothing. But in this room of old Southern money, she was too much and too old, all at once. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. She had spent 5 years supporting Edward's law firm, folding his laundry and mourning her own youth while she helped him build his. And they were right. He had traded her in for a newer model the moment the engine was running smoothly. She didn't wait for the I-dos. Bertha slipped out of the side door, the heavy oak thudding shut behind her like a gavel. She walked straight to her car, the heels of her shoes clicking a rhythmic enough against the pavement. 2 hours later, she was sitting in her home office, the air conditioner humming a lonely tune. Her laptop screen glowed. An old contact from her international consulting days had sent a panicked email. "Bertha, we have a crisis in the Seoul office. A high-profile corporate restructuring. We need a closer. Someone who doesn't care about local politics. Someone who can just fix it. 3 months. High pay. Apartment provided." She looked at a framed photo on her desk of her and Edward. She picked it up, her thumb tracing his smiling face. Then she dropped it into the trash can. "A relic?" she whispered to the empty room. Her voice wasn't breaking anymore. It was hardening into something metallic. "Fine. Let's see how a relic handles the Far East." She hit reply. Incheon International Airport, Seoul. The transition was a blur of Xanax and recycled cabin air. Bertha stepped off the plane into a world of neon, glass, and a language that sounded like music she didn't know the lyrics to. She was exhausted. Her joints ached from the 14-hour flight, and her soul felt even heavier. She was a tall black woman in a sea of monochrome suits and petite frames. She felt like a lighthouse in a storm, conspicuous, towering, and utterly alone. The Kang Group headquarters was a monolith of steel that seemed to pierce the very clouds of Seoul. As a temp consultant, she was given a badge that granted her access to the worker bee floors, but she felt the suffocating weight of the hierarchy immediately. "Ms. Brown," the HR manager said with a stiff bow, not quite meeting her eyes. "Your office is on the 22nd floor. Please focus on the efficiency reports. Avoid the executive elevators. The chairman's son is preparing for a significant transition. Security is high." Bertha didn't care about the chairman's son. She didn't care about the significant transition. She just wanted to work until her brain stopped replaying the sound of Mrs. Sterling calling her a fossil. By 4 p.m. on her third day, the walls of her glass office felt like they were closing in. The smell of floor wax and stale coffee was triggering a migraine. She needed air. She needed to be somewhere where no one could see her being too much. She found a maintenance stairwell. She climbed. 1 flight, 2, 5. Her lungs burned, a physical pain that finally dulled the emotional one. She pushed open the heavy steel door at the very top. The roof garden was an oasis. Manicured pines, stone lanterns, and a view of the Seoul skyline that looked like a circuit board made of diamonds. But it wasn't empty. Tucked away in the shadows of a massive HVAC unit, sitting on an overturned plastic milk crate, was a man. He wore a dark suit, but the tie was undone, hanging limply around his neck like a noose. His hair was a mess, falling over eyes that looked more tired than Bertha's felt. He was staring at a cheap paper cup of coffee as if it held the secrets to the universe. He didn't look like a god. He didn't look like a future. He looked like a man who had been hit by a bus and then asked to apologize to the bus. Bertha stayed in the shadows for a moment. She should leave, but then he let out a sigh, a long, ragged sound of absolute defeat. It was a sound she had made every night for the last 6 months. "You know," Bertha said, her southern drawl cutting through the crisp Seoul air, "staring at it won't make it taste any better. Those machines downstairs make battery acid, not coffee." The man jumped, nearly knocking his crate over. He looked at her, his eyes widening in genuine shock. He looked around as if expecting men to drop from the ceiling, but it was just them. Just a tall, weary woman in a power suit and a man hiding in the dark. He started, his English accented but polished. "I did not think anyone came up here." Bertha walked over, her movements slow and non-threatening. She leaned against the railing, looking out at the city. "I'm a ghost, just a temp here to fix some spreadsheets and disappear. And you look like you're about 10 minutes away from a total nervous breakdown." The man looked at her, really looked at her. He didn't look at her age. He didn't look at her skin as a difficulty. He looked at her like a person seeing a life raft in the middle of the ocean. "My boss," the man whispered, a dry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. "He is a very demanding man. He wants everything, all at once." Bertha snorted, reaching into her blazer pocket and pulling out a small peppermint. She tossed it to him. He caught it with surprising reflexes. "Well, tell your boss to go to hell," Bertha said firmly. "You're a human being, not a machine. You look like you haven't slept since the 90s. The man stared at the peppermint in his palm. A strange, almost hysterical laugh bubbled up in his chest. No one had spoken to him like this in 3 years. No one had dared. "Go to hell," he repeated softly. "I will try to remember that." "I'm Bertha," she said, extending a hand. He hesitated for a heartbeat. He didn't give his full name. He couldn't. "I am Sung-Yun." "Well, Sung-Yun," Bertha said, looking back at the twinkling lights. "Don't let them kill your spirit. Life's too short to be a slave to a suit." She walked away, the door clanging shut behind her. Sung-Yun sat in the silence, the peppermint dissolving on his tongue. He looked at the door, then back at the city he was supposed to lead. For the first time in months, the weight on his chest felt just a little bit lighter. Below him, in the streets, 1,000 posters were being pasted onto walls. They bore his face, airbrushed and perfect, above the words, "Kang Sung-Yun, the new leader for a new Korea." But up here, he was just a man with a peppermint, saved by a woman who thought he was nobody. The fluorescent lights of the 22nd floor hummed with a clinical, soul-sucking persistence. Bertha stared at a spreadsheet titled Efficiency Projections, Q4, but the numbers were starting to swim like tiny black insects. Her back ached. Her pride ached more. Every time she walked to the break room, the younger Korean interns would go silent, their eyes tracking her. The tall black woman who moved like she owned the place, but wore a temp badge. She knew the look. It was the "you don't belong here" look, the same one Edward's mother had perfected over Sunday brunch in Georgia. "I need to breathe," she muttered, grabbing her brown paper bag lunch. She bypassed the elevators. She didn't want to stand in a metal box smelling other people's expensive cologne and silent judgment. She found the gray zone, the maintenance stairwell behind the freight lifts. The air was cooler here, smelling of concrete and old dust. She climbed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a rhythmic reminder that she was still alive, still fighting. When she pushed open the heavy steel door to the roof, the wind caught her hair, tugging at them with a playful chill. She made it to the roof, and there he was again. He was crouched behind a massive humming vent, his back against the vibrating metal. His expensive suit jacket was balled up on the gravel next to him. He was staring at his phone with an expression of such pure, unadulterated dread that Bertha paused. "You look like you're waiting for a death sentence," she said, her voice carrying over the wind. Seung-hyun flinched, his phone nearly skittering across the roof. He looked up, squinting against the sun. Recognition smoothed his features, followed by a strange, flickering relief. "The woman with the peppermint?" he murmured. "The woman with a name," Bertha corrected, walking over. "Bertha. And you're still wearing that suit like it's a suit of armor that's 2 sizes too small." She sat on the edge of a concrete planter, a few feet away. She didn't crowd him. She knew what a cornered animal looked like. Up close, he looked worse than he had the day before. There was a smudge of ink on his thumb and a desperate, haunted quality to his eyes. "They are relentless," Seung-hyun said, his voice low. He gestured vaguely toward the floors below. "They want answers to questions I haven't even heard yet. They want me to be in 3 rooms at once. My boss, he is making it impossible to breathe." Bertha unwrapped her sandwich. It was a sourdough turkey club she'd painstakingly assembled in her small kitchenette. The smell of toasted bread and cracked pepper wafted between them. "You eat today?" she asked. He looked confused, as if the concept of food was a distant memory from a previous life. "I had coffee, many coffees." "Coffee isn't a meal. It's an anxiety accelerant." She looked at her sandwich, then at him. He looked so much like the overworked junior associates she used to mentor back in the States. Men who thought their worth was tied to how many hours they could bleed for a company that would replace them in a heartbeat. She snapped the sandwich in half. The crust crackled. She held out the larger piece. "Take it," she commanded. "I can't talk to a man whose stomach is growling louder than the wind." Seung-hyun stared at the offering. He was the man who, in 48 hours, would be guarded by a phalanx of Secret Service agents. He was the man whose daily meals were curated by nutritionists and served on bone china. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers. His hand was cold. Hers was warm. He took a bite. His eyes closed. It wasn't just the salt and the protein. It was the fact that it had been given to him by someone who didn't want a policy change, a tax break, or a political endorsement in return. She just wanted him to not be hungry. "It is very good," he whispered, leaning his head back against the vibrating vent. "Thank you, Bertha." "Don't thank me. Thank the turkey," she teased. She leaned back, looking out at the sprawling gray and glass horizon of Seoul. "So, what's the boss got you doing? Making you fetch his dry cleaning? Writing his speeches?" Seung-hyun let out a soft, bitter chuckle. "Something like that. He wants me to represent the face of the company, but he does not want me to have a voice of my own. I am a puppet who is losing his strings." Bertha turned to him, her expression softening. She saw the low-level manager being crushed by the corporate machine. "Listen to me, Seung-hyun. I spent 20 years building someone else's dream because I thought I was lucky to be there. I let a man make me feel like I was a supporting character in my own life. Don't do that. You're the one in the suit. You're the one doing the work. Without you, his face is just an empty mask." Seung-yun looked at her, his heart thudding. The irony was a physical weight. She was giving him the courage to be the president, thinking she was giving him the courage to stand up to a middle manager named Mr. Kim. "You think I have power?" he asked. "I think you have whatever power you stopped giving away," she said firmly. She stood up, brushing the crumbs from her lap. The sun was hitting her from behind, casting a long, regal shadow across the roof. To Seung-yun, she looked like a monument. "I gotta get back. Those spreadsheets aren't going to color code themselves," she said. She reached out and, in a moment of pure motherly instinct, smoothed the rumpled lapel of his jacket. "Fix your hair before you go back down there. Don't let them see you're rattled. Always let them think you know something they don't." She winked and headed for the door. "Bertha!" he called out. She paused, the heavy steel door ajar. "Yeah? Will you be here tomorrow?" Bertha felt a strange, fluttering warmth in her chest, the first bit of genuine joy she'd felt since the wedding. She looked at the man hiding behind the vent, and she smiled. "Depends on if I make a good sandwich or not. Don't be late, Seung-yun. I don't like my bread getting soggy." As the door clicked shut, Seung-yun finished the last bite of the sandwich. He pulled his phone from his pocket. It was buzzing with 64 missed calls from his campaign manager. He didn't check the messages. Instead, he looked at his reflection in the dark screen, smoothed his hair exactly the way Bertha had told him to, and stood up straight. The wind on the roof was sharper tonight, smelling of rain and the metallic tang of the city. Bertha was already there, leaning against the brickwork, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan that looked like a piece of home. When the door creaked open, she didn't hear a man walking. She heard a man dragging his soul behind him. Seung-yun stumbled out into the night air. His face was a mask of gray exhaustion. He had just finished a grueling 3-hour televised debate where his opponents had picked at his policies like vultures. His makeup had been wiped away, revealing skin that looked paper thin and bruised with deep violet circles under his eyes. He didn't even say hello. He just slumped onto the bench, his head falling into his hands. Bertha didn't say a word at first. She walked over, her shadow falling over him, and placed a hand on his forehead. "My God, Seung-yun, you're burning up and you're shaking like a leaf." "I am fine," he croaked, his voice raspy from hours of calculated oratory. "It was just a long meeting. The boss, he had me speaking for a long time. I had to defend the company's new direction." Bertha's eyes flashed with a fire that would have terrified his political advisors. She stepped back, her hands landing on her hips. "Now you listen to me," she started, her voice dropping into the low, dangerous register of a woman who has seen too much to be lied to. "I've seen some corporate greed in my time, but this is criminal. Your boss is a vampire, Seung-yun. He's sucking the literal life out of you for the sake of his bottom line." Seung-yun looked up, startled by the sheer force of her indignation. He thinks it is necessary for the future." "The future doesn't exist if you're dead in a casket by Friday," Bertha snapped. "Look at you. You've lost weight in 3 days. Your hands are twitching. Tell me, when was the last time you slept more than 2 hours? When was the last time you ate something that didn't come out of a plastic wrap?" Seung-yun opened his mouth to give his standard rehearsed answer about sacrifice for the nation, but the words died in his throat. He looked at Bertha, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't seen in years. He didn't see an advisor looking at a poll number. He didn't see a voter looking for a promise. He saw a woman who was genuinely, fiercely angry on his behalf. "I can't tell him no, Bertha," he whispered, a rare crack appearing in his armor. "If I fail him, everything falls apart." "Then let it fall," she declared, reaching down and grabbing his arm. She pulled him upward with a strength that brooked no argument. "The world won't stop turning because one important man has to wait for his report. You're coming with me." "Where?" he asked, stumbling as she led him toward the stairwell. To get some real medicine. And by medicine, I mean soup that's been simmering longer than you've been alive. Bertha led him 3 blocks away from the glimmering Kang Tower, down an alleyway so narrow their shoulders nearly brushed. They ended up at a tiny 4-table shikdang diner, tucked between a tailor and a closed laundromat. An elderly woman with a permanent scowl was stirring a massive pot of gukbap, pork soup. The night air was thick with the scent of garlic, ginger, and steam. "Sit," Bertha commanded, pointing to a stool. Jung-hyun sat, looking around in a daze. If his security detail saw him now, they would have a collective heart attack. He was the most recognizable man in the country, sitting in a fluorescent-lit basement with a woman who was currently lecturing the shop owner in broken Korean and expressive hand gestures about the best broth for a dying man. The soup arrived, hot, rich, and opaque. Bertha pushed a spoon into his hand. "Eat, every drop. And don't you dare look at that phone," she said, pointing to the device vibrating in his pocket. "If your boss calls, let him ring. Let him wonder. Let him realize that he doesn't own every second of your breath." Jung-hyun took a sip. The heat bloomed in his chest, chasing away the cold, hollow ache of the debate stage. He looked at Bertha, who was busy peeling a soft-boiled egg and dropping it into his bowl. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. "I am just a man in a suit. There are thousands of us in that building." Bertha paused. She looked at his tired eyes, and for a second, she saw not a low-level manager, but a lonely soul hiding behind a grand title. She reached across the small table and squeezed his hand. Her palm was calloused and warm, the most grounding thing he had ever felt. "Because, Jung-hyun, everyone in that building wants something from you," she said softly. "I'm the only one who wants something for you. Now eat your soup, or I'm calling your boss myself to tell him he's an idiot." Jung-hyun laughed, a real genuine sound that didn't belong in a press release. He ate. He felt the life returning to his limbs, and as he watched Bertha argue with the shop owner over the price of a side of kimchi, he realized with a terrifying clarity, he didn't just want her sandwiches anymore. He wanted her. The neon sign of the GS25 flickered, casting a rhythmic blue glow over the sidewalk. To the rest of Seoul, this was a place of convenience. To Kang Sung-hyun, it was an alien planet. "You're telling me," Sung-hyun said, staring at the wall of colorful plastic bowls with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb, "that I have to choose the noodles, the seasoning, and the water level myself?" Bertha leaned against the glass refrigerator door, clutching 2 cold sodas. She chuckled, the sound rich and grounding. "Sung-hyun, you've been living on catered salmon and misery for too long. It's ramen. It's the food of the people. Pick the spicy one. You look like you need to sweat out some of that corporate stress." He chose a black and red bowl, his movements stiff. He watched Bertha with a focused, almost hungry observation. He wasn't hungry for the food. He was hungry for her ease. She moved through the world with a confidence that didn't require a title or a podium. When the timer on the hot water dispenser dinged, he reached for the bowl, but his hand brushed hers. A jolt of electricity, sharp and undeniable, shot up his arm. He froze. Bertha didn't pull away immediately. She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his. For a second, the hum of the refrigerators faded into the background. "Careful," she whispered, her voice like velvet. "It's hot." "I see that," he replied, his voice dropping an octave. They took their steaming bowls outside to the patio. 2 blue plastic crates overturned on the sidewalk. The night air was alive with the sound of distant traffic and the chatter of teenagers. Sung-hyun sat on his crate, his $3,000 trousers stretching over his knees, and looked at the steam rising from his cup. "My life is measured in 5-minute increments," he said, peeling back the foil lid. Every person I speak to has been vetted. Every word I say has been tested by a focus group. But here, he looked at the plastic crate, then at Bertha, who was already slurping her noodles with unashamed gusto. I am just a man eating on a box. You say that like it's a bad thing, Bertha said, wiping a bit of broth from her lip. Being a somebody is exhausting. Being a nobody is where the fun is. Look at them. She gestured to a young couple nearby, sharing a single kimbap roll and laughing. They aren't thinking about the future. They're thinking about how good that seaweed tastes. Xingyun took a bite. The spice hit him. Aggressive, salty, and glorious. He coughed, his eyes watering, and Bertha laughed, handing him a napkin. Take it slow, Superman. It's not a race. He wiped his mouth, feeling a strange, bubbling lightness in his chest. I haven't felt human in a very long time, Bertha. People look at me and they see a symbol. They see a legacy. They see a solution to their problems. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on her. You are the only person who looks at me and sees me. Bertha's expression softened. She reached out, her thumb catching a stray drop of soup on his chin. Her touch was brief, but it burned. Maybe that's because I don't give a damn about symbols, Xingyun. I'm too old for fairy tales. I just like the way you listen when I talk, even if you are a bit of a disaster in a convenience store. He laughed, a genuine throat-clearing sound. He felt a sudden, fierce desire to stay on this plastic crate forever. No poles, no advisors, just the smell of spicy broth and the warmth of the woman across from him. Bertha, he said, his voice turning serious, if I were just a man, if there were no boss, no company, would you still have shared your sandwich with me? Bertha smiled, a slow, beautiful curve of her lips. Honey, I don't share my turkey clubs with just anyone. You're special, Xingyun, even if you're a bit of a mess. As they sat there, two silhouettes against the neon, a black sedan slowly cruised by. The tinted window rolled down an inch, a camera lens glinting in the dark for a split second, before the car sped off. Xingyun didn't notice. He disguised himself so well that he thought no one would recognize him. He was too busy watching the way the streetlights caught the gold in Bertha's earrings. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running for office. He was just there. The rain in Seoul had a way of making everything look like a noir film. Shimmering, cold, and lonely. But inside the small alcove of the roof garden, the heat from the industrial vents kept the chill at bay. Bertha wasn't looking at the skyline tonight. She was looking at his wrist. Xingyun was leaning against the railing, checking the time. His watch was a masterpiece of Swiss engineering, a piece of art that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. But the leather strap was frayed at the edges, the stitching coming undone from the sheer friction of him checking it every 30 seconds for the last 3 years. That's a sad sight, Bertha said, nodding toward his wrist. Xingyun looked down, surprised. It is an heirloom. My father gave it to me when I started my journey. Your father should have given you a new strap then, Bertha teased, walking closer. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, humble circle of braided nylon. It was a mixture of deep indigo and gold thread, the kind of thing sold at street stalls near the Namdaemun market for less than the price of a bus fare. Give me your hand, she commanded. Xingyun obeyed without hesitation. He extended his right arm, and she gently slid the braided cord over his knuckles. It settled just below the heavy gold watch, a cheap, vibrant contrast against his pale skin and the crisp white cuff of his shirt. It's a luck bracelet, Bertha explained, her fingers lingering on his pulse point as she tightened the knot. An old woman near my apartment was selling them. She told me the indigo is for protection, and the gold is for a clear head. You look like you need both. Xingyun stared at the $2 string. It felt heavier than the watch. Bertha, I I have never worn anything like this. Think of it as a reminder, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. When the vampire is screaming at you, or you feel like you're losing yourself in those meetings, feel that string. It's a piece of the real world, a piece of this. He looked into her eyes, and for a moment, the roar of the city disappeared. I will never take it off, he promised. The Grand Ballroom, Shilla Hotel. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the suffocating musk of old money. Seung-yeon stood at the center of a circle of the kingmakers, 7 billionaires who controlled the flow of energy, shipping, and technology in East Asia. They weren't just donors. They were the men who decided if a president lived or died politically. The polls are shifting, Seung-yeon, one of the elders said, his voice like dry parchment. The people want a populist, but we need a strategist. Can you be both? Or are you getting soft? Seung-yeon felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The executive panic that usually preceded a polished, empty response. He reached up to adjust his cuff, his fingers grazing the rough, braided nylon hidden beneath his sleeve. The texture was a jolt to his system. He remembered the smell of the roof garden. He remembered Bertha's laugh. He remembered the taste of the $1.50 ramen. Suddenly, the billionaires didn't look like giants. They looked like tired old men in expensive boxes. He straightened his back. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. A smile his advisors hadn't coached. I am not getting soft, Seung-yeon said, his voice ringing with a new, terrifying clarity that made the elders blink. I am getting focused. You ask if I can be both? I will be whatever the people need, but I will not be a shadow in your pocket. Now, let us discuss the trade tariffs, or let us stop wasting the champagne. The elders exchanged stunned glances. Seung-yeon's campaign manager, standing in the corner, nearly dropped his tablet. This wasn't the scripted Seung-yeon. This was a man who had found his spine. Throughout the night, as he shook hands and signed invisible treaties, Seung-yeon kept his left hand in his pocket, his thumb obsessively rubbing the indigo threads. The $2 bracelet was a secret weapon, a tether to a woman who saw him as a man, not a monument. He was a king in waiting, wearing a pauper's gift, and for the first time in his life, he felt invincible. The rain wasn't a storm. It was a mist, a fine silver veil that turned the glowing skyscrapers of Seoul into smudged watercolors. It settled on Bertha's hair like tiny diamonds and made the concrete of the roof garden slick and dark. Seung-yeon arrived late. He didn't come from the stairwell this time. He seemed to emerge from the fog itself. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was damp, clinging to his shoulders, and his tie was gone. He looked stripped back, raw, like a statue weathered by the elements. You're going to catch your death of cold, fool, Bertha said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. She stood near the ledge, her cardigan pulled tight around her. He didn't answer. He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the wet stone. When he reached her, he didn't stop at a polite distance. He stepped into her space, the heat radiating off his body clashing with the cool mist. The meeting ended, he said, his voice a low vibration. They were talking about the image of the future. They were talking about national destiny. And all I could think about was the way you look when you're about to tell me I'm being an idiot. Bertha looked up at him. The height difference forced her to tilt her head back, exposing the elegant line of her throat. Seung-yeon, you've had a long day. You're talking crazy. No, he whispered. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he tucked a stray, damp curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered there, his thumb brushing the line of her jaw. For the first time in my life, I am not talking crazy. I am talking the truth. This roof, this is the only place I exist. Everywhere else, I'm just a ghost in a suit. Bertha felt her heart hammer against her ribs, a frantic, youthful rhythm she thought she'd buried in Savannah. I'm a temp, Sung-yun. I'm 50 years old. I'm a woman from a world you don't even know. You are the woman who gave me a sandwich, he countered, his eyes searching hers with a desperate intensity. You are the woman who told me to tell my boss to go to hell. You are the only person who hasn't asked me for a single thing. He leaned in closer, his forehead resting against hers. The scent of him, expensive cologne mixed with rain and the salt of his skin, overwhelmed her. I don't want a perfect man, she whispered, her breath hitching. Good, Sung-hyun breathed, his lips a fraction of an inch from hers. Because right now, I am just a man who is very, very tired of being alone. He closed the distance. The kiss wasn't like the cinematic, polished moments Sung-hyun's PR team would have scripted. It was slow and beautiful. It tasted of rain and the peppermint Bertha had been chewing. It was the collision of two people who had spent their lives being strong for everyone else, finally letting the walls crumble. In that moment, the billions of one, the millions of voters, and the looming shadows of the Blue House didn't exist. There was no power imbalance, no Chaebol air, and no relic. There was only the sound of their breathing and the quiet patter of the rain. For the first time, Sung-hyun wasn't running toward a goal. He had arrived. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads still touching, Bertha let out a shaky laugh. Lord have mercy. We are going to get in so much trouble, Sung-hyun. Sung-hyun smiled, a real, boyish look of triumph that would have baffled his political opponents. He raised his left hand, the $2 indigo bracelet soaked with rain, and pressed a kiss to her palm. Let the world come, he said. I have a place to hide now. The morning after the kiss, the air in Seoul felt different to Bertha, charged, electric, and dangerously sweet. She walked toward the Khan Group headquarters with a spring in her step that she hadn't felt in decades. As she approached the main intersection, a massive city bus screeched to a halt at the red light, momentarily partitioning the world. On the other side of the street, a crew of workers was pasting a gargantuan 3-story tall vinyl poster onto the side of a building. The image was half of a man's face. It was regal, airbrushed, and commanding. Bertha stopped. She squinted. There was something about the set of the jaw, the lip, and the nose. No, she whispered to herself, it couldn't be. Just as the workers smoothed down the section containing the eyes, those deep, soulful eyes she had kissed in the rain, the bus let out a hiss of air brakes and roared forward. A second bus, a bright red express, immediately pulled into its place, followed by a delivery truck. By the time the traffic cleared, a swarm of pedestrians had moved in, and Bertha's phone chimed with a high-priority alert from her supervisor. Get your head out of the clouds, Bertha, she chided herself, turning away from the poster. He's a salaryman, not a superstar. That evening, the tension on the roof was no longer just romantic. It was clinical. Bertha was waiting with 2 cups of hot tea when the stairwell door didn't just creak. It slammed. Sung-hyun stumbled out, but he wasn't alone. The heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots echoed in the concrete shaft behind him. Stay back, Sung-hyun hissed, not to Bertha, but to the shadows behind him. Sir, the perimeter is not secure, a stern, metallic voice replied from the doorway. A man in a sharp black suit and a translucent earpiece stepped into the light, his eyes scanning the roof with the precision of a predator. Bertha froze, the teacups trembling in her hands. Sung-hyun, who is this? Is this the vampire's muscle? Sung-hyun's face went pale. He stepped between Bertha and the security guard, his heart hammering. If this guard reported her presence, his father's fixers would have her on a plane back to Georgia before dawn. Or worse. He is a new floor manager, Sung-hyun lied desperately, his voice cracking. He's very intense. Efficiency, you know. He turned to the guard, his eyes flashing with a hidden presidential authority that made the younger man flinch. I am conducting a private site inspection. Leave. Now. That is an order. The guard hesitated, his gaze landing on Bertha. He saw an older black woman in a sensible cardigan. To him, she was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of a high-stakes Korean election. But he saw the way the future president was shielding her. He bowed stiffly and retreated into the stairwell. Bertha set the tea down on the crate, her breath coming in short huffs. Sung-hyun, what the hell was that? Site inspection? Since when do floor managers carry sidearms under their blazers? I saw the bulge in his jacket. Sung-hyun sat down, his hands shaking as he reached for the tea. The dramatic irony was now a physical weight. He was a king hiding in a hovel, and the walls were thinning. My boss, he is involved in a very tense merger, Sung-hyun said, weaving the lie with threads of truth. People are angry. There are protesters. He insists on this protection for his senior staff. It's why I'm so tired, Bertha. It's why I hide here. It's not just work. It's a cage. Bertha sat beside him, rubbing his shoulders. Honey, no job is worth living in fear. You're a good man. You could walk away. We could go somewhere quiet. Just you and me. Sung-hyun looked at her, his heart breaking. He could give her the world, but he couldn't give her a quiet life. He looked down at the $2 luck bracelet on his wrist. I can't walk away yet, he whispered, but I promise you, when this merger is over, everything will change. As they sat in the dark, the near miss at the bus stop and the guard in the stairwell lingered in the air like a countdown. The world was screaming his name, but Bertha was the only one calling his soul. Tor, the silence was louder than the city. For Bertha, the roof garden had become the center of her universe, but tonight it was just a cold slab of concrete. She sat on the blue plastic crate, 2 cups of convenience store coffee cooling between her feet. The steam had long since stopped rising. She checked her phone for the 100th time. No texts? No. I'm running late. No. The boss is being a vampire again. 24 hours. Since last contact. Bertha tried to focus on her work. She spent the day in her glass-walled office, moving data from one column to another, but her eyes kept drifting to the elevators. Every time the ding echoed, her heart leaped, hoping to see a rumpled suit and a tired smile. But it was only interns, delivery men, and stern-faced executives in $5,000 suits who didn't look her way. Maybe he did it, she whispered to the empty office. Maybe he finally told that boss to go to hell, and the boss fired him on the spot. The thought made her stomach churn. If Sung-hyun was fired, he'd lose his access badge. He wouldn't be able to get to the roof. She didn't even have his last name, just Sung-hyun. In a city of 10 million people, he had vanished into the gray. 40 hours. Since last contact. The atmosphere in the Kang Group building had shifted from corporate efficiency to high alert tension. Security guards were stationed at every corner. Men in earpieces patrolled the lobby. Bertha tried to take the maintenance stairs, but a guard blocked her path. Access restricted, ma'am. Floor 22 and below only. Executive orders. I just need to check the roof garden, Bertha said, her southern charm replaced by a sharp maternal edge. There's a manager, who might be in trouble. The guard didn't even blink. There is no one on the roof. Move along. Bertha retreated, a cold knot of dread tightening in her chest. Her mind, fueled by her past trauma with Edward, began to weave a dark narrative. He's gone. He used you for a little comfort while things were hard, and now that the merger is happening, he's moved on. You're just the temp again, Bertha, the relic he visited when he was bored. She went home to her small, sterile apartment. She didn't turn on the lights. She just sat by the window, watching the rain streak against the glass. 46 hours. Since last contact, the city was vibrating. Outside her window, the sounds of chanting and loudspeakers echoed through the streets of Seoul. She could hear the muffled roar of crowds, the honking of horns, and the distant rhythmic beat of drums. Political nonsense, she grumbled, pulling her cardigan tighter. She assumed it was just another protest or a holiday she didn't understand. She picked up her phone to delete his number. If he was gone, he was gone. She wouldn't be the woman who begged. She wouldn't be the woman Edward left behind again. And her finger hovered over the delete button. "I thought you were different, Sung-yeon," she whispered, her voice breaking in the dark room. "I thought you were actually drowning. I didn't think you were just playing in the water." She looked at the small indigo and gold thread she had left on her nightstand, the twin to the one she gave him. It looked so small, so cheap, so insignificant compared to the towers of Seoul. She didn't delete the number. Instead, she threw the phone onto the bed and walked to the kitchen to put on the kettle. She needed tea. She needed to drown out the noise of the city. She needed to forget that for a few nights on a roof, she had felt like she finally belonged to someone. She reached for the TV remote to find some white noise, some mindless weather report to fill the silence. The screen flickered to life. The tea kettle began to whistle, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the heavy silence of the apartment. Bertha ignored it for a second, her eyes fixed on the microwave timer as it counted down. 3, 2, 1. She pulled out a bowl of leftover beef stew, the steam smelling of home, but her heart wasn't in it. She felt hollow. It had been 48 hours since Sung-yeon had vanished. She was convinced he had been fired, or worse, that he had realized a relic from Georgia didn't fit into his upwardly mobile life. She sat down at her small dining table. She picked up the remote, seeking the comforting drone of the news to drown out her thoughts. The screen didn't show the weather. It was a sea of color. The volume was low, but the energy coming off the screen was tectonic. The news anchor's voice was breathless, speaking in rapid-fire Korean that Bertha couldn't follow, but the graphics were universal. A map of South Korea was bathed in a single color. A tally of numbers hit 100%. Election results, Bertha sighed, stirring her stew. Poor Sung-yeon. Probably lost his job because his boss was too busy with this nonsense to notice he was dying on his feet. She reached for her phone to try one last text. "Are you okay? I made stew. You can come over if you need a place to hide." She didn't hit send. Something on the screen caught her eye. The camera moved to a wide shot of a massive stage at a convention center. Thousands of people were chanting a name, a rhythmic, thundering roar that shook the very speakers of her television. Kang Sung-yeon! Kang Sung-yeon! Kang Sung-yeon! Bertha froze. The spoon hovered halfway to her mouth. "That's a common name," she whispered to the steam. "It's like John or Michael. It's not him." Then a figure emerged from the side of the stage. The man was walking toward the podium. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Bertha's entire house in Georgia, a deep navy fabric that caught the light like armor. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his face powdered to hide the exhaustion she knew was etched into his soul. But it was the walk. It wasn't the strut of a victor. It was the same heavy, deliberate walk she had seen every night on the roof. The walk of a man who carried the world on his shoulders and just wanted to sit on a plastic crate for 5 minutes. The camera zoomed in as he reached the podium. There he was, Sung-yeon. He raised his hand to wave to the screaming masses. The light hit his wrist. Peeking out from beneath the $500 silk cuff of his shirt, clashing violently with the gold watch and the dignity of the office, was a frayed, water-stained circle of indigo and gold thread. The ceramic bowl slipped from Bertha's fingers. It hit the floor with a sickening final thud. beef stew and porcelain shards exploded across her kitchen tile, splattering her pajama pants. But she didn't feel the heat. She didn't smell the garlic. "No," she breathed, her voice a ghost of a sound. On the screen, the man she had scolded for being a low-level manager stepped into the spotlight. The chyron at the bottom of the screen flashed in bold golden letters, President-elect Kang Seung-yun. The camera caught his face in a tight close-up. He looked out at the millions of people cheering for him, but for a split second, his eyes looked distant. He reached over with his other hand and touched the braided bracelet, thumbing the knot exactly the way she had told him to do when he felt overwhelmed. Bertha stood up, her legs shaking so violently she had to grab the edge of the table. Memories flashed through her mind like a car crash. Him eating convenience store ramen on a blue crate. Her telling him his boss was a vampire. His lips on hers in the rain, whispering that he had nowhere to hide. "I wasn't saving a drowning man," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "I was holding the king." The vampire wasn't a middle manager. The vampire was the entire nation of South Korea. And she wasn't his sanctuary. She was his secret. The humiliation she had felt at the wedding in Savannah was nothing compared to this. This wasn't a rejection of her age or her skin. It was a rejection of her entire reality. On the TV, Seung-yun began to speak. His voice was deep, commanding, and presidential. It was the voice of a man who owned the future. Bertha reached out and fumbled for the power button. The screen went black, plunging the room into a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing her lungs. She looked at the mess of stew on the floor. She looked at her phone, where the unsent text to a salaryman still sat on the screen. The silence of the apartment was vibrating with the ghost of the chanting crowd. Bertha stood in the center of her kitchen, the cooling beef stew seeping into the grout of the floor tiles, and she felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to lean against the counter. Her mind began to rewatch their movie through a new, horrific lens. The security guard in the stairwell. He hadn't been a floor manager. He had been a trained assassin whose job was to protect the future of the Republic. The convenience store. Those black sedans hadn't been random traffic. They were a protective detail watching their future leader eat $1.50 noodles with a foreign temp worker. "A vacation," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was just a vacation." The spiral took hold of her, fast and jagged. She thought of Edward's mother back in Savannah, laughing about her being a history project. She realized that President-elect Kang, had spent his nights with her for the same reason a man goes to a spa or a quiet park. She wasn't his partner. She was his escape. She was the eccentric woman who didn't know who he was, a novelty he could enjoy before returning to his real life of power and porcelain-skinned debutantes. "He lied every time he breathed," she muttered, grabbing a suitcase from the closet and tossing it onto the bed with a violent thud. She began shoving clothes into it, handfuls of silk blouses and sensible slacks. She didn't fold them. She just needed to leave. Every "I'm tired" was a script. Every "I have no one" was a performance. He was playing commoner with me. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. She looked at her skin, the hair she had carefully maintained, the lines around her eyes that she usually wore with pride. In the high society world of the Blue House, she wasn't just a stranger. She was an impossibility. She was a liability. She could see the headlines already. Who is the mysterious older foreigner? Is the president compromised? He'll pay me off, she realized, a cold shiver running down her spine. Or his people will. They'll come here with a check and a non-disclosure agreement to make sure the roof garden lady never speaks again. The thought of being handled by a man in a suit, again, was the breaking point. She couldn't let it happen. She had to leave before the president remembered she existed. She had to vanish before the Secret Service realized she knew exactly how many sugars he took in his tea, and that he had a scar on his left shoulder he never explained. She grabbed her passport, her hands shaking so much she nearly dropped it. She looked at her phone one last time. There was a notification, a news alert. President-elect Kang Sung-hyun enters private residence for first night of security transition. Good for you, Sung-hyun, she sobbed, finally letting a single hot tear fall. I hope the crown fits. I'm going back to being a relic. She zipped the suitcase, the sound like a serrate blade cutting through the air. She didn't check the stove. She didn't look back. She walked out of the apartment, leaving the shattered mug and the spilled stew behind, the remains of a life she had accidentally hallucinated. But as she stepped into the hallway, the elevator dinged. 2 men in identical charcoal suits and earpieces stepped out. They didn't look like building security. They looked like the men from the roof. Ms. Bertha Brown? One of them asked, his voice a flat, terrifying monotone. Bertha gripped her suitcase handle until her knuckles turned gray. I'm leaving. I have a flight. You tell your boss I don't want his money and I won't say a word. The men didn't force her. They didn't offer a check. They simply stepped aside, clearing the path. The taxi ride to Incheon was a blur of neon streaks and rain-slicked asphalt. Bertha sat in the back, her suitcase wedged against her knees like a shield. She had managed to give the agents the slip at her apartment by using the service stairs, a trick she'd learned from a lifetime of being underestimated. But she knew the clock was ticking. Every time a black sedan pulled alongside the taxi, her heart performed a violent, panicked staccato. She felt like a fugitive, though her only crime was believing a man's lies. Just get to the gate, she whispered, wiping a hot, frustrated tear from her cheek. Incheon International Airport was a cathedral of glass and steel, humming with the frantic energy of thousands of souls in transit. Bertha stepped in, the blast of air-conditioned air hitting her like a slap. She looked up at the departure boards. Flight 802 to Atlanta, boarding in 45 minutes. She moved toward the check-in counter, her eyes darting. She felt exposed. At 6 feet tall, with her vibrant skin and her silver-flecked hair, she was a beacon. She tried to shrink into herself, pulling her coat collar high. As she stood in the security line, she saw her own face, or rather her proximity to his face, on a newspaper at a kiosk. The headline read, "The Ghost of the Roof. Who was the woman in the scandalous leaked photos?" The photo was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Sung-hyun, his head thrown back in a laugh, sitting on a blue plastic crate. Beside him, blurred but unmistakable, was Bertha. "A scandal!" she choked out, a fresh wave of tears blurring her vision. "I'm not a woman he loves. I'm a scandalous leak." She made it through security. She made it to gate 12. She sat on the hard chair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the massive Boeing 747 being fueled on the tarmac. She thought of the $2 bracelet. She imagined him standing in a marble hall, surrounded by generals and billionaires, while she sat here alone with a boarding pass and a broken heart. The power imbalance wasn't just about money or titles. It was the fact that he had known everything about her world, while she had known nothing of his. He knew I was a temp. He knew I was lonely. He knew I was vulnerable. And he used that to hide. "Final boarding call for Flight 802, the gate agent announced. Bertha stood up, her legs feeling like lead. She clutched her passport. She took one last look at the television monitors hanging from the ceiling. They were showing a live feed of the presidential palace. Sung-hyun was there, standing behind a podium, looking grim and regal. "Goodbye, Sung-hyun," she whispered, turning her back on the screen. "I hope the vampire treats you well." She handed her ticket to the agent. The machine beeped, a sharp, discordant sound. "I'm sorry, Ms. Brown," the agent said, her brow furrowing as she looked at her screen. There seems to be a security hold on your seat. A hold? I paid for that ticket. I'm a U.S. citizen, Bertha said, her voice rising in a mix of fear and defiance. I understand, ma'am, but... The agent went silent, her eyes widening as she looked past Bertha toward the terminal entrance. Bertha turned around. The terminal, which seconds ago had been a chaotic swarm of travelers, was falling into a sudden, eerie hush. People were stopping in their tracks, phones raised. Coming down the concourse wasn't a lone agent. It was a phalanx, 20 men in dark suits, moving in a perfect, terrifying V formation. Leading them was the head of national security, the man Bertha had seen on the news only an hour ago. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't shout. He walked straight to Bertha, stopped 3 feet away, and performed a deep 90-degree bow that silenced the entire wing of the airport. Ma'am, he said, his voice echoing in the stillness, the president-elect has issued a temporary grounding order for all outgoing flights to the United States. Bertha's breath hitched. He grounded the planes? No, ma'am, the officer replied, straightening up. His eyes were respectful, but firm. He grounded the planes because you were on one of them. He said to tell you, you told me never to let the boss bully me. Well, I'm the boss now, and I'm not letting you go. The silence at Gate 12 was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Hundreds of passengers stood frozen, their boarding passes forgotten in their hands, as they watched the phalanx of black suits create a human wall around a 50-year-old woman in a travel-worn trench coat. Bertha felt the eyes of the world on her. She felt the cameras of 100 smartphones clicking, capturing the moment the ghost of the roof was finally cornered. He can't do this, Bertha whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and terror. This is an abuse of power. I am a private citizen. The head of security, a man named Director Choi, didn't flinch. He is the president-elect, Ms. Brown. He is the most protected and the most powerful man in this hemisphere. If he says the air is closed, the air is closed. Outside the massive glass windows, the scene turned surreal. The runway lights began to flash in a coordinated emergency pattern. A motorcade of 12 identical black armored sedans, flanked by police motorcycles, screamed across the tarmac, bypassing all airport security. They headed straight for the jet bridge of Flight 802. The lead car, the one flying the gold and blue pennant, came to a screeching halt. The gate doors hissed open. Usually passengers exited the plane. This time, the passengers were 6 tactical agents who cleared the path, followed by a man who looked like he had stepped out of a dream and into a nightmare. Seung-hyun walked into the terminal. He was still in his suit, but he had ripped the tie off. His white collar was open, his hair was windswept from the tarmac, and his face was set in a look of such raw, desperate determination that the crowd instinctively backed away. He stopped 10 feet from her. The Secret Service formed a perimeter, pushing back the press and the curious, creating a private island in the middle of the busiest airport in the world. Bertha, he breathed, the way he said her name, not as a politician, but as the man who had eaten her sandwiches, made her heart shatter all over again. Don't Bertha me, she snapped, her southern fire erupting through her tears. You lied. You sat on that crate. You ate my food. You let me tell you my life story while you were planning how to run a country. You weren't a drowning man, Seung-hyun. You were a predator looking for a place to hide. Seung-hyun flinched as if she'd struck him. I wasn't hiding from you, Bertha. I was hiding with you. I was drowning. The vampire I told you about? It was the responsibility. It was the expectations. You were the only thing that was real. Real? Bertha laughed, a jagged, bitter sound. Look around us, Seung-hyun. Look at the men with guns. Look at the planes you stopped. This isn't real. This is a movie, and I'm just the character you use for a plot twist. I'm 50 years old. I've been humiliated enough for one lifetime. I won't be your secret or your scandal." She turned to the gate agent. "Open the door. I'm getting on that plane." "The plane is not moving, Bertha," Jung-hyun said, his voice dropping to that low, authoritative vibration she had only heard in the press conferences on TV. He stepped closer, entering her personal space. The agents twitched, but he waved them back. He reached out and grabbed her hand, the one clutching her passport. He didn't pull it. He just held it. His thumb found the $2 indigo bracelet on his other wrist and pressed it against her skin. "I am the president-elect," he whispered, so only she could hear. "In an hour, I have to go to a gala where I will be surrounded by people who want to carve me into pieces. I have to lead a nation that is divided. I have to be a king." He leaned in, his forehead almost touching hers, echoing their kiss in the rain. "But I can't be any of those things if I have to go home to a house where you aren't there to tell me I'm being an idiot. I'm not asking you to be a secret. I'm asking you to be my peace and strength." "They'll hate me," she sobbed, her resolve melting. "The world will tear me apart, Seung-yun. Look at me. I'm a 50-year-old black woman. I don't know anything about your world." "Let them look," he said, turning toward the hundreds of cameras pointed at them. He didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he interlaced his fingers with hers, the dark skin of her hand against his pale, polished palm, and held it up for the entire world to see. "Let the whole world see who gives me peace." The camera shutter sounded like machine gun fire. Bertha looked at the plane, then at the man who had grounded the sky for her. She knew that if she walked through that gate, she was safe, but she was alone. If she stayed, she was entering a war. She looked at Seung-yun. "You're still a disaster, you know that?" A small, genuine smile broke through his exhaustion. "I know. That's why I need a consultant." Bertha let out a long, shaky breath. She dropped her boarding pass. It fluttered to the floor like a fallen leaf. "Fine," she whispered, "but if there's no stew in that house, I'm leaving." Seung-hyun laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated triumph. He turned to Director Choi. "Tell the pilots they can fly now, but tell the motorcade we're going home."